What comes to mind when I say the words true crime? Is it a short docuseries on Netflix? Maybe a podcast you like listening to on your commute to work? Or maybe even a content creator you like watching? I think all of these count. I would say that true crime has to do with disappearances, murders, serial killers, kidnappings, all that dark kind of stuff. Technically speaking, you could say the news is true crime since they're reporting on true events that have happened, but this is not about news broadcasting. I recently watched the Waco Siege documentary on Netflix, and I will say it re-sparked my interest in true crime, along with learning in my film history class about the evolution of film documentary or documentary film throughout the years. And with all this talk of true crime in my mind, I could only come up with one question. Why? Why are we so obsessed with the morbid? Why is true crime so popular nowadays? And why are there so many true crime documentaries on Netflix? Please, I can't keep watching them all. These are some questions that I'll be answering in this video essay, but first, some background. Crime pamphlets originated in 16th century Britain, and they tended to detail gruesome murders and other capital crimes in the area. Because the lower class in Britain was uneducated and usually illiterate, these pamphlets were mostly read by the literate elite. Stories within these pamphlets report of recent murders and disappearances within the community. Think of them as your typical newspaper, but more crime-centered. While the stories were based on true events, they were often written in a sensationalist manner that was meant to captivate readers. It's like a clickbait article before the word clickbait even existed. For even more detail, they provided illustrations and diagrams of what was done to the bodies, i.e. dismemberment, mutilation, where the stabbings were, all that kind of stuff. One of the first instances that I found of true crime as a spectacle would be in the Paris morgues. Planted in the heart of the city, this theater of death displayed corpses for the public to view. Often these bodies were unidentified and were displayed for the public to help identify them. Keep in mind that the process of identifying these victims came with the process of uncovering their murderer. The unsolved mystery of Jack the Ripper was the first recorded account that I found of a serial murderer that gained popularity through widespread newspaper coverage. London newspapers were running rampant with stories of a serial killer going about and killing sex workers during the night. Details of the body mutilation done by Jack were put right on the front page of these newspapers. Unfortunately, these sex workers were often subject to assault, and their frequent happenings, along with the status of these women in society, deemed their stories not worthy enough for newspaper coverage. What made the stories of Jack the Ripper's killings more, I would say, interesting is the fact that the bodies were dismembered and dealt with even after death. This means that it was not just some killer out for blood. There was thought put into these murders. In the film world, there was direct cinema, or also called candid cinema, which essentially filmed its subjects and observed them directly. Then came the meta-documentary scene, born in the 1980s, and it rose in opposition to direct cinema. The most famous example is Errol Morris's The Thin Blue Line. It tells a story of a murder case in Dallas, Texas, where an officer was shot, and is most famous for its heavy use of staged reenactments of the crime. With The Thin Blue Line, Morris poses the problem with these dramatizations of crime and how they can't be fully trusted. Yet retellings of these cases from officials and witnesses is all we have to go on. So we kind of just have to believe it. Nowadays, it seems like crime documentaries tend to follow Morris's format of highly dramatized reenactments of a murder scene, or just the true crime case itself. And the number of documentaries out there, like I said, it's just absurd. Searching true crime on Netflix reveals thousands upon thousands, maybe not thousands, but hundreds of results on crime documentaries, and other forms of true media like YouTube videos and podcasts have only grown in popularity over recent years. With the retelling of a murder case comes the debate of whether it's morally correct to be telling these stories and consuming this media. Netflix documentaries don't necessarily have to work closely with the victims to tell their story, and that can lead to misconceptions about the case. Not only that, but the victims of these events can be highly affected by these productions using their stories. It can be hard for a victim to re-witness the trauma they've already gone to and endured. It feels like true crime podcasters and YouTubers have only further increased this discussion. These newer forms of true crime media present the stories in a more casual manner, from get ready with me's to mukbangs to quirky podcast hosts talking about their favorite murder. This feels somewhat dystopian and just outright disrespectful to the victims. Although the murderers in these cases deserve absolutely no respect for what they've done, the way certain creators go about it is just not right. For example, Danielle Christie's video on the ice cream killer, and the way she's talking about them sounds like she's sympathizing with them, all the while doing her makeup like she's gossiping with friends. Mukbang videos follow a similar format, recounting a horrible crime while stuffing one's mouth with absurd amounts of food. The problem with these videos is having the host do a secondary act while recounting a horrible crime makes the video seem disingenuous, disrespectful, and just tone deaf. So, why are we willing to engage with disrespectful content like this? I'm not saying all true crime content follows the moral guidelines. There is some content out there that focuses on telling a well-researched story that engages with all parties in a respectful manner. But why are we interested in listening to these stories about murder, kidnappings, and disappearances in the first place? There seem to be many answers to this, but here's what I found. For starters, there's the term morbid curiosity, which is defined as an interest in or curiosity about unpleasant things, especially death. It might come from an innate and primal feeling to assess the dangers we face in real life, because it's not that we're curious about death itself, but rather the process that leads to death. For some true crime fans, it can help them stay aware of the dangers out there and how to better prepare for them. For others, it can be a safe space to explore these unpleasant topics of murder and other crimes. It can also just be because true crime fans love delving into the minds of these twisted serial killers. I will admit, the psychology behind why criminals do what they do is pretty interesting. Learning what a human being is capable of and the lengths they're willing to go to is pretty fascinating. It's one of the many reasons people study criminology today, to dissect what makes these criminals tick. Although true crime has seen its ups and downs throughout the years, I think it's safe to say that it's not going to go anywhere. This whole project has taught me to be more aware of what I'm consuming and how it affects me as both a viewer and an amateur filmmaker. Being a true crime fan is not a bad thing, as long as you're aware that what you're consuming are the stories of real people, or the closest thing to it. As we've seen, retellings of a crime can depend from witness to witness, so it's hard to take the information we get at face value. Finally, let's make sure we're not glorifying these murderers and serial killers and the terrible acts that they've committed. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time, maybe.